So when Leandro asked me to speak here, I was kind of a bit surprised because I'm an industrial designer, and I actually deal with objects, physical things. That's what I've already done and been doing for quite a long time. But in the dialogue we've had for quite a long time, I think there's a lot of common ground between the physical and the digital part. And I kind of thought, what can I tell this crowd of people in interaction and digital, which they don't know? So I just decided to do something very simple and try to give you a little bit of feeling of what I have learned. They're not very complex things. Things are actually much more simple often than we think. And share that with you. So I'm Icelandic, and I lived there the first 20 years of my life. Iceland is famous for music bands and volcanoes. As you have already heard today, Woman remembered Iceland because of a volcano in the 17th century, and I think a lot of people actually remember another volcano some years ago that did another havoc. Less critical, but still a lot of people complained with me at least. After those 21st year, I actually moved to Italy, where I've been living the last 26 years. I studied design, and I've been working on with multinationals, marketing to technology. I've been working in all kinds of fields, quite hardcore industrial design. Products, I'm pretty sure that almost most of you have used products that I've designed. But you may not be aware of it because we are not the typical Italian design company that signs off and is designed by whoever and so on and so forth. I've also, because of my interest, worked with non-profit organization, government, and in this kind of a way of doing, and coming from Iceland, which is rather different from Italy, I kind of started to wonder about, because there are so many different things when I was here in the beginning, is that I didn't really capture. And it took me quite a long time, for example, to manage a discussion in Italian. For foreigners to come to Italy and try to participate in a discussion is a horrible thing. My part, we talk, and then we stop, and the other person talk, and we kind of agree on it without saying anything. Here you have to yell louder than the next person to get attention. So I started wondering, why is this difference? And it came to me that there are actually theories about it, and that's what we call high context culture and a low context culture. So I have, I'm being lucky or not, that I come from we can say low context culture, but I've lived most of my adult life in a high context culture. It has been a kind of quite heavy learning curve. And I opened my eyes to a lot of things, and actually I'm quite happy about it, but there's also another thing about it that actually shocked me quite, is that most of the world drinks coffee and you get coffee. In Italy it's not so simple, it's much more complex. And actually you have all the different kinds of coffees, but you also have variation of that. I mean, you can have cappuccino, slightly warm, not with a lot of foam, or very hot coffee with a little bit less foam or more and cold. It gets pretty complicated here. So I thought it's quite interesting. And since I think one of the key elements of a designer is curiosity. I mean, you're not going to go anywhere without that. I kind of tried to understand why is this, and try to get kind of a look on design is about what? What is it? And also through my early travels is that to understand different cultures, advertisement is a wonderful tool. Because you have a lot of people working in the advertisement industry, doing research, doing all kinds of analysis, hiring the best people of the country to understand groups of people and how they behave. So I always looked at advertisement as a way of doing ethnographic research in a very easy way, actually pulling in the talent of almost the best people in any country to understand it. And as you say, I mean, coffee in Italy is promoted in one way, coffee in America is promoted in a totally another way. One is politically correct, another one is as politically correct. Another element that always fascinated me is food retail. Why is it interesting? I was once in Scotland many years ago, and my wife doesn't eat pork. There were 4 meters of a shelf in a supermarket of pork and 1 meter of some green stuff. In Italy, it's the opposite. Why is this? it's because the culture of people is different, or they buy different things. And what is interesting also about that is that you may think, if you look at internet or Google things, that England is one of the great culture of kitchen, because chef books, TV shows about chef and cooking and recipe books and all that, and you see wonderful things. But go to this supermarket and you will see that most of it is ready-made stuff they buy there or not. So to understand the true culture of nations, look how advertising is prepared for them and look what they eat. That's very simple. So what does this bring me to? Is that design is actually very simply about understanding culture. If you don't understand the culture you're operating in, you're not going to go very far with it. Another thing that always have hit me is different way of behaving. And when I read this many years ago, this phrase is here, I kind of got, yes, it's right, there is a truth in this. Because I remember many years ago seeing this lady, I work with a big multinational company from America, and she had made an Excel file for choosing her car, and had compared all the functionalities and stuff like that. In the end, she selected a red Audi A4, which I'm pretty sure was not the highest on the Excel file, because in the end, emotions and what we really like is what drives us. So why is it that, rationality, we are technology evolved, we move forward and all that, but in the end, a lot of the decisions and choices we make actually come from our stomach. And it's actually quite simple, because in a way, we start very early on as a very primitive to work with tools. And it'd be quite interesting to hear today talks about tools, because tools are good, but what distinguishes us just from making tools is actually that we, as a human sapiens, we added something more to it. We added cognitive meanings, we added communication, we added other elements to the tools itself, and that's what gives it a meaning. It's not only to having tools to do something, it's actually what are you going to do with all these tools? Because tools are great, but it's what you do with them. Another thing from these kind of, you can say, elements, what it kind of made me thinking is that we should not talk about, user, consumer, and so. It's much more simple. It's just we work for people, and what people really care about in terms of digital, physical, what you want to call it, is relationship with the objects. We love building relationship with our objects. So if you have something very new technology, but it doesn't have, it's not clad or built into an object that you relate to, you're never going to really like it or love it. So that gave me, and this is actually the object that Leonardo likes. It's very simple. It's very simple. It's for children, but kids really love playing with it. It somehow relates to them and their reaction, because the relationship is about very physical and psychological experience, much more so than the digital part. It's the physical, it's the gut feeling we have when we relate to objects. And that brings me to my second observation of learning in these years, is that design is actually about people and their relationship with objects. Another issue I'm kind of intrigued that very seldom I've been called with my clients a designer. I've been called, latest was anthropologist, and I've been called engineer, architect, and all these kind of things, because most of the time people don't understand what you're actually doing. And because people love complicated things, but they don't understand that there's a difference between complicated and complexity. And if you want to do something, or develop or design something, you have to look at it from very many points of view, and that's because people start thinking about you as being expert on different things. Another misunderstanding I think I come from this is that you mix complexity with complication, and you take the approach of what I've been taught a lot, to break down things into a lot of little problems, which is all well and good, but like ergonomy from the 70s and the 80s, I don't know how much many of you remember when ergonomy was the key thing in designing products and physical. They all went over the hill continuously of doing it exaggerated and too complex to use. It was becoming something that human beings, we don't relate to objects in that way. You may measure, you may come to a conclusion about the standardization of different kind of things, but that's not what people are about. We relate to things in a totally different way. And if you don't understand this, and you just want to do it as you measure things, you're actually oversimplifying the whole relationship with an object. And another thing that happened recently that kind of gave me a theme I like is that this, what you call pseudoscience. When we research something and we believe we understand it. Recently they found a skull in Georgia that actually brings to, we can say, reality that what we have thought about human evolution is probably not so right, because it's probably all of the different type of humans we thought we had, they are probably from the same person. What I just loved about this story is that it's actually pointing out that sometimes we research something, we build a whole lot of science about some facts that are not necessarily right, and then they collapse every now and then. And this research about defining certainty, we should just remember that it's a bit more complex quite often. As I mentioned before, different points of view, different objectives. When I do design things, I have to look at it, yes, the person that uses it, but I also have to look at, is he going to love the object? How is he going to relate to the object? I have to think, someone has to sell that object, so there's some kind of marketing involved, there's some kind of production involved, there's some kind of branding involved. And these are all elements that you have to consider at the time you're developing, whatever you're developing. So you have to go to and take the different points. So I guess I'm not rarely called designer, I'm called everything else. I just have to accept that, because as a part of being designer is actually to be hybrid. It's actually to change hats every now and then, because to solve the overall problem you have to look at things with different perspectives. Another thing I wanted to touch on is innovation. Innovation is a big word now. And it's always funny to think that for many years, Nussbaum, who kind of coined in a way with IDEO, the whole design thinking aspect, he used the word design trying to convince his editors, why don't we write about design in the late 90s, early 2000s, never catched on until he changed design for the word innovation. So if you talk about innovation, everyone is interested to listen to you. But there are different types of innovation. One is market-driven, which is kind of incremental and slow. You can have technology-driven innovation, which I think you all know. You buy something and it takes you ages to learn how to use it. That's when you have this technology-driven, which is kind of limited in many ways. You have the classical Italian design. By the way, the one with the candle is my design from when I was a student. Because in this way, it's a very famous product, sold a lot. But in the way, I never think nobody used it for what was done. I mean, most people just put it on a shelf, so why don't just make it a shelf object? That's the truth about it. But it created business and it created innovation. I love why, because in some way, I think that's a kind of a good mix of technology mixed with design and how you use things, and you came up with something we call design-driven innovation. Roberto, who is the Polytechnic here, have tried to, because designers have always talked about design-driven innovation, but nobody listened to them until there is someone who structures it, because designers are not very good in structuring things. You just like showing products and talk. So this was actually a little bit difficult for me not to show you just 40 products. It would have been much easier. But there is this that you have the marketing pool, you can have technology pools, but the real diamond is when you have the design-driven basically meeting the technology pools. That's when you get something interesting, in my opinion, on it. Another element is user-centered or not. Typically, design operates what we could call interpretation. So we analyze, we are part of the culture, we look at very different things, and we somehow interpret the user's need. I'm not saying that research is not necessary, it's just that we have to be careful of interpreting correctly the research we do. So what I kind of thinking also about what the audience I'm talking to, what I feel that is lacking and have been lacking a bit is that the interaction between, or the alliance, can we say, between interaction designers who deal with more the digital part and the product designers who do more the physical, is there are some cases where it happened well, but it's not really happening very strong. And that's something I think we have to work on, and that's what I'm getting interested in and coming to meetings like this, is that we have to somehow build those bridges together. And it's, if you can say, it's not, UX is not about web, mobile, and so on. It's more about actually the ecosystem of the physical and digital together. And from my point of view, it absolutely derives from the humans, from the persons, from the people. and the physical world, because we relate to the physical before we relate to what they actually do, the objects. And so physical and digital should be complementary. They are, and they should be working much tighter together. I have 52 seconds. It's really damaging, this thing, that kind of countdown. Sorry. So trying to wrap it up, I think what I've learned in my years and working is that design is about curiosity. It's understanding culture. It's relating to people, meaning empathy, the relationship. It's about having vision of the whole. Don't forget that you're not using pieces of things. And be hybrid, not have the courage to actually change hats, even though sometimes people may not recognize who you are. And that physical and digital are complementary. And that's another element which I think is quite important. So with this, I just say grazie, and I finished 9 seconds before I should. Never happened before. Thanks.
Thank you, Siggy.